Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The cemetery was silent, shrouded in a veil of light mist that gave each grave a ghostly appearance. Only the wind and the rustling of dead leaves disturbed the calm, while the setting sun cast elongated shadows on the damp ground. Around a freshly dug grave stood a few bikers, their faces grave, their gazes heavy with sadness. They had come to say goodbye to Emily Carter, their friend, their soulmate in this world of roads and freedom. Yet, they weren't the ones attracting the most attention. Beside the coffin, a black dog, Shadow, stood motionless. His dark, shining eyes stared at the dirt-covered wood with an almost human intensity. He wouldn't move away. Even when James, one of the bikers, approached to pet him, Shadow backed away slightly, but would immediately return to the coffin. He sensed something no one else could sense. The wind carried whispers of hidden secrets, and the air seemed thick with an ominous sense of foreboding. Emily wasn't just gone. Something terrible had followed her here, and Shadow, loyal to the end, refused to leave his mistress alone. James leaned down and whispered, "Shadow, what do you know that we don't?" The dog looked up, as if to answer, but there was silence. Yet, in that silence, a shocking truth was waiting to be discovered. A truth that would upend everything the bikers thought they knew, and reveal that Emily's death was no accident. Shadow, faithful and silent, watched. And soon, reality would unfold, more terrible than anything they could have imagined. The autumn wind blew through the small Maplewood cemetery, making the red and gold leaves dance on the damp ground. The bikers were gathered around Emily Carter's freshly dug grave. Their leather jackets and black boots contrasted with the peaceful setting, but none of them spoke. Pain and incomprehension were evident on their faces. Emily's black dog, Shadow, sat motionless beside the coffin. His dark eyes, shining with sadness, stared at the earth as if he understood something no one else saw. Emily's friends had tried to lead him away, but every time they approached, the dog immediately returned to the coffin, as if to protect his mistress. James Miller, one of the bikers and Emily's close friend, knelt down beside Shadow. "Hey, old guy, it's okay," he murmured, running a gentle hand over his fur. Shadow growled softly, a sound that wasn't threatening but charged with warning. James stepped back slightly, intrigued and a little worried. He then noticed a detail that had escaped him until now: the coffin seemed slightly out of place, as if it had been handled after the burial. A chill ran down his spine. Sarah Mitchell, a longtime friend of Emily's, approached him. Her eyes were red with tears, but her gaze was sharp, almost alert. "James, you noticed that too, huh?" she whispered. "Yes, something's wrong. Shadow would never do that for no reason. And look at the coffin, there's something wrong." The other bikers began to notice the small, unusual signs: a slight unevenness in the earth, fresh prints too large to be those of an animal. The atmosphere became heavy, almost oppressive. Everyone felt an unease they could not explain. Shadow laid his head on the coffin, and a solemn silence fell over the group. Memories of Emily flooded into their minds: her clear laugh, her kindness, her courage in the face of all odds. No one wanted to believe that she had been the victim of something darker than natural death. James closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. "If someone hurt him, I swear, we'll find out the truth," he said determinedly, his voice trembling but firm. Shadow raised his head and stared at James intensely, as if to approve of his promise. His eyes shone with an almost human loyalty and intelligence. This dog knew that Emily's death hid a secret. And that secret would soon come out, upsetting the lives of everyone present. The wind intensified, carrying with it a foreboding chill. The mystery of Emily Carter's disappearance had only just begun. The ceremony over, the bikers slowly remounted their motorcycles, but none of them really wanted to leave. Maplewood seemed eerily silent, as if the small town were holding its breath. Shadow followed James a few steps from the coffin, his head bowed but still attentive to every movement around him. On the dusty road leading to town, James felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced at Shadow, who was trotting silently beside him, as if guided by some mysterious intuition. "You know," James said, breaking the silence, "I've never seen a dog act like this, ever. There's something we don't know." Sarah Mitchell, who was sitting behind him on her brother's motorcycle, shook her head. "I felt it too. Emily, she never left without letting us know. Shadow, he senses something." James was lost in memory for a moment. Emily and Shadow had been inseparable since childhood. Whether in the pouring rain or during their walks in the forest, Shadow had always protected Emily. His strange behavior today couldn't be a coincidence. Arriving at the garage where they stored their motorcycles, the group slowly dispersed. Some went to get coffee to calm their nerves, while James stayed outside, watching Shadow. The dog stared at the forest bordering the road, his ears erect, tense, as if waiting for someone or something. Sarah approached him. "James, do you think she's sending us a message?" "I don't know," James murmured, staring into the gathering darkness of the forest. "But something tells me Shadow knows what we need to find out." That night, James had trouble sleeping. Images of Emily kept coming back to him, her smile, her voice, and that last strange week where she seemed preoccupied with something, but never wanted to talk about it. She had mentioned anonymous letters and a feeling of being followed. James felt a lump in his chest. Emily's death might not have been natural. In the early morning, Shadow never left the front steps of James's house. As if the dog sensed that the truth could not wait. James, unable to remain passive, decided to gather the group to investigate discreetly. He knew that Shadow would be their silent guide, their link to what no one yet saw. "We need to understand what happened to Emily," he told the bikers. "She deserves to find the truth. Shadow, are you with us?" The dog raised his head, his bright eyes reflecting the morning light. He sat still, but James knew he'd understood. Together, they would discover what Emily's death concealed. And somewhere, in the shadows of Maplewood, a secret waited, ready to burst forth. The next morning, Maplewood awoke to a low, gray sky. Light rain fell intermittently, making the streets even quieter. James and Sarah had gathered the bikers closest to Emily to discuss what had seemed strange to them since the funeral. Shadow followed them, trotting silently beside James, ever vigilant. "Look," James began, his tone serious, "I know this might sound crazy, but Shadow doesn't behave like this for no reason. And this coffin, there's something wrong with it." The other bikers exchanged worried glances. Among them, Tyler and Marcus nodded, understanding what he meant. The idea that Emily's death wasn't natural was slowly settling into their minds. Sarah took a small notebook out of her bag. "Emily told me last week about anonymous letters she was receiving. Threatening ones. She didn't want anyone to worry, but I think someone really had it in for her." James Frasana. "So, if someone wanted to silence her, maybe her death wasn't accidental." Shadow leads the way. The dog suddenly stopped in front of a bush near the abandoned house next door. He sniffed the ground insistently and growled slightly. James knelt down and noticed fresh footprints that belonged neither to an adult nor to a running animal, irregular, almost furtive prints that led towards the garden behind the house. "Look at this," said James, showing the prints to the others. "There's someone here, recently." Tyler frowned. "We should notify the police." "Not yet," James replied. "We need to figure it out before we alert them. Shadow knows, he's leading us somewhere." They followed the dog through the bushes and the overgrown garden. Shadow stopped in front of a small patch of upturned earth, almost invisible under the dead leaves. James used a branch to scratch lightly. He discovered a damp envelope, carefully sealed despite the rain. Sarah gently took it and opened it. Inside, threatening photos and messages fell to the floor. The bikers exchanged horrified glances. Emily had been targeted, followed, and intimidated before her death. "We can't ignore this," Marcus murmured, his voice trembling. "This is proof that his death wasn't natural." Shadow rested his head on James's shoulder, as if to say, "You're on the right track. Keep going." The dog seemed to understand that the group had just crossed a threshold, the one where simple sadness turned into investigation. James clenched his fist, his gaze determined. "So we're going to find out the truth about Emily. And no one will be able to stop us." Above them, the sky remained gray, but something in the air had changed. James's premonition was confirmed. Emily's death was only the beginning of a deeper mystery, and Shadow, faithful to the end, would be their guide through this dark truth. The wind had picked up that morning, stirring the branches of the trees in the abandoned house's backyard. The previous day's rain had left the ground soggy, and a light mist hung between the buildings. Shadow, ever attentive, led the small group of bikers across the wasteland, his paws leaving regular prints in the soft earth. James stopped in front of an old, moss-covered pile of stones. Shadow sat down in front of it, groaning softly and placing his paw on the largest stone. "What did you find, old brother?" James whispered. He carefully removed the stone, revealing a small hole in which rested a rusty metal box. Sarah knelt to open it and discovered carefully arranged documents inside, letters, photos, and handwritten notes. Everything indicated that someone had been targeting Emily for weeks. The letters were threatening, some warning her not to interfere, others mentioning secret meetings she had refused. Tyler frowned. It's incredible. All this time, she was being followed and harassed. And no one knew. Marcus added, his voice trembling. What if someone wanted her gone?" James took a deep breath. "We can't ignore this. Shadow brought us here for a reason. He's showing us that someone wanted to hide the truth." Shadow rested his head on James's arm and looked at the documents as if recognizing what they meant. The dog seemed to understand the extent of the danger Emily had been in before her death. Sarah leafed through the letters and stopped at a photo taken in front of James's house. An indistinct figure was standing near Emily, but she had never seen it before. "It's him," Sarah whispered. "His face is blurry, but it's the same one that's been following her for the past few weeks." James felt anger rising inside him. "We need to find out who this man is and why he wanted to hurt Emily. Shadow is leading us to the answers." The group decided to take the box back to James's house to examine it further. Shadow remained close by, vigilant, his dark eyes shining with an almost human intelligence. It was clear that the dog had sensed the cruelty planned behind their friend's death. This discovery shocked the entire group. Emily's death was no longer just a tragedy, it was a premeditated crime. And every document, every photo, every threatening word brought the bikers closer to the truth they feared. It was getting dark when James, Sarah, and the others gathered around the living room table. The documents spread out before them told a terrifying story. Emily had been the victim of methodical intimidation, and Shadow, loyal and watchful, was the silent key to understanding what had really happened. James placed his hand on the dog's head. "Thank you, Shadow, without you, we would never know. And believe me, we will see this through." The dog looked up at him, almost as if to answer, "I am with you." And in that silent gaze, James felt a certainty, the truth about Emily's death was going to come out, and nothing and no one could prevent it. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy and humid. James, Sarah, Tyler, and Marcus stood outside the house of their prime suspect, David Reynolds, a strange and distant neighbor known for his cold and secretive nature. Shadow, true to form, trotted ahead of them, sniffing every corner with almost human alertness. "Well," James murmured, "we have to be careful. We don't know what this man is capable of." Sarah nodded, her face serious. "But you have to know. Emily deserves to have the truth discovered." They knocked on the door, and Reynolds appeared a few seconds later, looking surprised but quickly masked by a cold smile. "What do you want?" he said in a cold voice. James didn't respond immediately. He watched Shadow, who remained motionless near his feet, staring intently at Reynolds. The dog growled softly, and James could tell the tension was rising. "David Reynolds, we have some questions for you regarding Emily Carter," James began calmly but firmly. Reynolds's face tightened. Emily? What do you mean? She's dead. It's over. Tyler advances. No, it's not over. We have evidence that you were following her, that you were threatening her. We know someone wanted her gone. Reynolds frowned, trying to remain calm, but a nervous twitch betrayed his guilt. Shadow growled louder and louder, his tail stiff and his fur standing on end. The dog seemed to be trying to protect Emily's memory by intimidating the culprit. I don't know what you're talking about, Reynolds stammered, trying to close the door. But James put his hand on the door to prevent it from closing. We know. We found the letters, the photos, and the evidence of your threats. You can't lie to us. Reynolds stepped back, disconcerted. His gaze fell on Shadow, who was staring at him with an almost human intensity. The dog didn't move, motionless but imposing. It seemed to read Reynolds's soul, and that was enough to make the suspect tremble. All right, Reynolds finally whispered, his voice weak and shaky. You don't understand, it was meant to be. I just wanted to scare him, not. Sarah crossed her arms, her eyes shining with anger and pain. You pushed it too far. And now Emily is dead. And you're going to have to answer for all of this. Silence fell over the group, broken only by Shadow's breathing and the light breeze in the trees. Reynolds, aware that his guilt was now exposed, backed away a little further. He knew the police would be alerted, but he didn't know the bikers were determined to gather all the evidence they could before calling the authorities. James turned to the group. Shadow led us here. We have the evidence. It's time to put it all together and ensure justice for Emily. The dog rested his head on James's foot, as if in silent approval. In that tense moment, the group knew that their four-legged friend was not just a loyal companion, he was their guide in the quest for truth and justice. This confrontation was only the beginning. The truth about Emily's death would soon come to light, and Reynolds, despite his arrogance, had no escape. Night had fallen over Maplewood, shrouding the town in a veil of mystery. In James's living room, the bikers had gathered around the table, laying out the evidence they had gathered, letters, photos, notes, and incriminating documents. Shadow, faithful as ever, sat beside James, his head resting on his knees, his eyes shining with an almost human intelligence. Sarah took a deep breath and pointed to one of the most recent letters. Listen to this. Emily had discovered that Reynolds had been planning something for weeks. She wanted to call the police, but he threatened retaliation. She was terrified, but brave, she didn't want anyone to suffer because of her. James gritted his teeth, his heart clenched with anger and sadness. So it was all premeditated. It wasn't just threats. He planned his death. Tyler, who had been searching through the oldest documents, looked up. There's more. Emily had a secret notebook where she wrote down everything that seemed suspicious, encounters, faces, cars. She knew we were following her. And I think that's how Shadow led us to the evidence. Marcus nodded, both admiring and worried. That dog, it's like he understands. Like he knows exactly where to look and what we need to find. James placed his hand on the notebook he had found earlier under the stone in the garden. Emily left us a guide. Shadow is her silent messenger. He leads us to the truth Reynolds wanted to hide. A heavy silence fell over the room. Shadow raised his head and stared straight into James's eyes, as if to confirm his thoughts. The dog knew. He had sensed the danger, Emily's fear, and the betrayal that awaited him. Sarah continued, her voice trembling but determined. And there's one last clue. In that notebook, Emily mentioned a recording. She had placed a hidden dictaphone in her room to record Reynolds in case he tried to threaten her again. James stood up abruptly. We have to go get it back. This dictaphone could reveal everything. The group left the house, Shadow leading the way with impressive precision. Arriving at Emily's apartment, the dog headed straight for her bedroom, stopping in front of the drawer where the dictaphone was hidden. James opened the drawer and took out the device. As they listened to it, Reynolds's threats and plans played back clearly over the speakers, every word confirmed what they feared. "It's over," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "Now we have everything." James placed his hand on Shadow's head, gently stroking his black fur. "Thanks, old brother. Without you, we would never have found this." The dog raised its bright eyes to him, almost as if to answer, "We won't let Emily down." That night, the evidence was gathered. The truth about Emily Carter's death could no longer be hidden. Shadow, loyal and perceptive, had led the bikers to uncover the premeditated crime. Justice was now within reach. The next morning, the sun rose timidly behind the Maplewood Hills, casting a pale light on the still damp streets. In James's garage, the table was covered with documents, letters, photos, and now the dictaphone he'd retrieved from Emily's room. Shadow sat beside James, his eyes watching every movement, alert for any suspicious signs. "We almost have everything," James murmured, his tone serious. "Reynolds won't be able to deny his actions this time. Every piece of the puzzle is there." Sarah looked at one of the letters again. "And look at this, every thread is dated, every photo identifies the places he followed Emily to. He thought she wouldn't do anything, but we have his proof and his audio recording." Tyler nodded seriously. "If we take all this to the police, Reynolds won't stand a chance. He thought he was manipulating us, but we've planned everything." Marcus, still reeling from the violence and the shadow of Emily's death, stared at Shadow. "That dog, it's incredible. He guided us to every clue. We never would have found the notebook or the recording without him." James petted Shadow, feeling the dog's loyalty and intelligence as a silent force. "Shadow was the link between us and the truth. Without him, everything would have remained hidden." As they were putting all the evidence in order, Sarah noticed something they had missed, a small note scribbled in pencil in Emily's notebook. "Look, it's an address." She was supposed to use it to trap Reynolds, in case he continued his threats. James leaned over the paper. "Perfect. This is our chance to catch him. If we go in together, with everything we have, Reynolds won't be able to say anything or deny it. Shadow, are you ready?" The dog raised his head, his eyes bright and attentive, as if to confirm that he would guide the group to the end. They left the house on their motorcycles, Shadow trotting beside James on the sidewalk, each of them feeling the adrenaline and determination. Every step, every turn brought them closer to the final confrontation. The group knew the truth would come out, and that Emily would be avenged. Arriving at the address, they discovered an abandoned warehouse. The place was silent, but a half-open door suggested someone was inside. Shadow froze and growled softly, warning the group. "Now's the time," James whispered. "Get ready, and stay close." Every piece of evidence, every clue gathered since the funeral, from the notebook to the dictaphone, was now converging toward this crucial moment. Reynolds would be confronted with his crimes, and Shadow, loyal and vigilant, would be there to ensure justice was done. The dog placed his paw on James's hand as if to say, "Now is the time. Don't give up." And in that moment, the plan Emily had hatched in her final days was beginning to come to fruition. The truth was finally about to come out, and Reynolds would no longer be able to hide his guilt. The sun was setting on the horizon as James, Sarah, Tyler, and Marcus approached the abandoned warehouse. Shadow walked in front, his ears pricked and his eyes alert, detecting every movement and sound. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with tension and the promise of confrontation. "Stay alert," James muttered, his fist clenching on the handlebars of his motorcycle. "Reynolds knows we're coming. He can feel the end approaching." The dog stopped abruptly in front of the half-open door, growling a deep, menacing sound. James took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Inside, Reynolds stood, surprised and visibly nervous, surrounded by piles of documents he had accumulated to hide his threats and manipulations. What are you doing here?" Reynolds stammered, trying to maintain some semblance of control. James stepped forward, Shadow at his side. "We know everything, Reynolds. Every threat, every photo, every word you sent to Emily Carter. And we have a recording to prove it." Reynolds paled, looking from James to Sarah, then to the documents spread out by the group. You have no proof," he said, but his voice betrayed panic. Tyler holds up the dictaphone found in Emily's room. "Listen for yourself. Every word, every threat. You can no longer deny your crimes." The sound of Reynolds's voice, menacing and cruel, echoed through the warehouse, confirming their suspicions and leaving the group speechless. Even Marcus, accustomed to remaining stoic, felt a chill run through his body. Shadow approached Reynolds, his dark eyes staring at the man with an almost human intensity. The dog growled, a silent warning that any escape or attempt at violence would be futile. Reynolds backed away, knowing he had no escape. "All right," he finally whispered, his voice weak and trembling. I didn't plan on. I didn't want to. I just wanted to." Sarah cut him off in an icy tone. "You just wanted her to be scared. But you went too far. Emily is dead, and now you have to answer." James took out his phone and called the police, remaining vigilant, his gaze fixed on Reynolds and Shadow, who never took his eyes off the suspect. A few minutes later, sirens sounded in the distance, and Reynolds knew there would be no escape. The police arrived quickly, escorted by the bikers. Every piece of evidence was carefully documented, and Reynolds was arrested, unable to deny his actions in the face of the evidence. Shadow, loyal, watched the scene, motionless but attentive, as if to ensure that justice was finally served for Emily. James placed his hand on the dog's head. "You were amazing, Shadow. Without you, we would never have discovered all this." The dog raised its bright eyes to him, almost as if to answer, "Emily will be avenged." That evening, Maplewood returned to a semblance of calm. The truth about Emily Carter's death was finally out, and Shadow's silent loyalty had ensured justice was served. But for James, Sarah, and the bikers, this victory was also a painful reminder that the memory and loyalty of a friend can sometimes be the most powerful weapons in the face of injustice. The next morning, the small town of Maplewood seemed brighter, but the memory of the tragedy still hung in the air. Reynolds had been taken into custody, and the evidence gathered by James, Sarah, Tyler, and Marcus had been turned over to the police, leaving little room for doubt. At the courthouse, the room was packed. Maplewood residents, friends, and bikers had come to watch the hearing. Shadow, loyal and silent, sat by James's side, watching every move. His gaze seemed to carry Emily's legacy, unwavering loyalty and a constant reminder that the truth had triumphed. The judge read the charges, threats, harassment, and finally manslaughter, a result of Reynolds's premeditated actions. The words echoed heavily in the room, and each member of the group felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Sarah, her voice trembling but determined, declared in court. Emily Carter was a courageous woman. She was bullied and threatened, but she never lost her dignity. We can't bring her life back, but we can ensure justice is done. Reynolds tried to speak, but his shifty gaze and weak voice betrayed his guilt. The evidence presented, letters, photos, a dictaphone, and the testimony of the bikers, was overwhelming. The judge concluded that Reynolds had planned his threats and should be held accountable for his actions. Outside the courthouse, an impromptu ceremony was held to honor Emily's memory. Bikers, friends, and neighbors placed flowers on her grave. Shadow sat motionless by the coffin, as if understanding the significance of this moment. He had guided his friends to the truth and now watched over Emily's memory with unwavering loyalty. James placed his hand on the dog's black fur, a sad but grateful smile on his face. "Thank you, old brother. Without you, none of this would have been possible." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, added. "She would have been proud of all of you, and of you, Shadow." The riders revved their motorcycles one last time, a silent but powerful tribute to Emily. The roar of the engines echoed through the valley, carrying with it the message that justice had been served and that Emily's memory would live on in the hearts of those who loved her. Shadow laid his head on the coffin, his eyes shining, and remained so long after everyone had left. The loyalty and faithfulness of a friend, James thought, can sometimes surpass that of even humans. And this dog, more than any other, had shown what true loyalty was. In the following weeks, Maplewood slowly regained its composure. Justice had been served, Reynolds was in prison, and Emily Carter's memory lived on in the hearts of all who had known and loved her. But for James, Sarah, Tyler, Marcus, and especially Shadow, the memory of their friend would never fade. Shadow had become more than a companion, he was a living symbol of loyalty and determination. Every morning, he accompanied James along the roads they had once traveled with Emily, silently watching over him and the places where their friend had laughed, talked, and lived. One afternoon, James, Sarah, and the rest of the bikers gathered at the cemetery for a memorial service for Emily. Autumn leaves danced in the wind, and the light of the setting sun bathed the grave in a soft, golden glow. Shadow sat by the coffin, motionless, his presence imposing but calming. James placed a hand on the dog's fur. "You were incredible, Shadow. Emily never imagined such a loyal companion. Thanks to you, the truth came out, and we were able to do her justice." Sarah, her eyes moist but shining, added, "She will always live on in our memories, and because of you, Shadow, we were able to protect what she loved most." The group remained silent for a few moments, letting the wind carry the leaves around them. Shadow gently laid his head on the grave, as if to watch over the one he had loved and protected forever. James understood then that loyalty was not just a human trait, but a force that could transcend death, guide the living, and protect the memory of those we loved. Shadow had been the link between the past and truth, between pain and justice, and his silent presence would continue to inspire all who knew his story. As they left the cemetery that evening, the group looked back one last time. Shadow stood motionless, watching over Emily's grave as he had since the first day. And in his shining eyes, James read a silent promise, that friendship, loyalty, and justice could survive anything, even death. Maplewood was quieting down, but Emily's memory and Shadow's quiet courage would forever be etched in the hearts of all who had been touched by their story. A dog's loyalty had revealed the truth. A friend's loyalty had brought justice. And Emily Carter's memory would live on forever.